Just press start. Oh, brilliant. Okay, great. So with that in place, I'll hand over to Alice Hemming and Richard Howlett, who carried out the research on this report. Alice and Richard both have experience of living on boats and are also well experienced in the community-led housing sector. So welcome, Alice and Richard, and over to you.
Hi there, I'm Alice. I hope you can see me here in my little box. So I think Richard's just bringing up this report, but we first wanted to kind of introduce ourselves. So my background, I've got a passion for bringing spaces and places into community ownership. So I've worked with the Oxfordshire Community Land Trust and their plans to build affordable housing. I've worked with MakeSpace and the Children's Allotment to bring empty and dilapidated spaces back into community use. And for the past 6 years, I've lived in Dragonfly Housing Co-op in Oxford, which has been cooperatively owned and managed by the tenants who've lived there for the last 20 years. So that's given me some insight into the highs and lows of communal and cooperative living. And my partner lives on a boat as well, and he cruises around Oxford, so I've got a bit of a taste for life abroad as well.
Cheers, Alice. Hi, everyone. So my name is Richard Howlett, and yeah, I work with Alice on the report. And I lived on a boat for 4 years in Oxford, and until I moved down to London into this flat, which you can see behind you now, here a couple of years back. And now I work on supporting new cooperatives to start up here in London. I've been lucky enough to give a bit of support to a boaters co-op in West London called Welcome, and I can see that there's a couple of members here tonight, which is great. And I was also for several years an Oxford City Councillor. So this, being involved in this report, was a kind of amazing opportunity to sort of bring together different parts of my life and sort of make some small contribution to the kind of future of liveaboard boating in Oxford from my new home in London. So yeah, it was an amazing thing to be part of, and yeah, really great to be presenting it to all of you tonight.
So we've said who we are, but I'd love to know who you all are. So I'm just wondering if you can either just wave in your little box or show a reaction. So if you are a boater, if you currently live on a boat in Oxford or somewhere else, give us a wave. Don't know if people can see each other there. If you are somebody who works on the waterways or is part of an organisation that works with boaters or people on the waterways, give us a little wave. Great, cool. If you are part of an agency that manages or is yeah, a steward of waterways, also give us a wave. Great, cool, lovely to meet you all. And yeah, I'm hoping that this is a kind of beginning of a conversation between all of these people that are in the room. And so I guess I wanted to kind of say, where are we coming at this from? What's the context of this? And so I think the most important thing to say is that this has been done in the context of Oxford's housing crisis. And I think if you're not from Oxford or you're not familiar with Oxford, it's been kind of classed as one of the most unaffordable places to live in the UK comparative to wages. But it's also a watery city, so it has 2 rivers, it has a canal, and it has a long history of people living and working on the waterways. There's some pictures here of Jericho then and now. And I think it's fair to say also that there's been a kind of a history of mistrust between the different agencies, such as, you know, the City Council, Environment Agency, Canal, River Trust and boaters. And I think this is a chance, hopefully, to kind of open dialogue between all those different stakeholders and try and offer new ideas and approaches to how we could be working together to kind of create more affordable and sustainable housing solutions in Oxford. And this work actually was started because some local boaters who were kind of dissatisfied with how their moorings were being managed kind of approached collaborative housing, and we had an event, and that's kind of spun off, and we're really excited because I think this is the first piece of this kind of work that's ever been done, looking kind of holistically at the idea of community-owned moorings. And so yeah, that's where we are. But what I wanted to also ask everybody's help with is some jargon bingo. So I think there's a lot of terms and bodies and people that we'll mention that people might not be familiar with. So if there's anything that comes up that you don't know what it means, put it in the chat, and there'll be lots of people here who can help answer that question. So yeah, I guess the first thing is kind of Oxford's current situation that we talked about in the report. So there are 89 permanent residential moorings across the city. So you can see here this map. The green is kind of leisure marinas. So this is for boats that aren't being lived on. And then there are residential moorings here, mostly on the canal. And they're managed by the CRT, which is the Canal and River Trust, and they're also private moorings. But what we've found in this report is that the current residential moorings massively undercaters for the level of need in the city. So I think the Oxford City Council did a needs assessment in 2018, and they thought that 41 new residential moorings were needed over 20 years. So it's actually, you know, not very much over 20 years. And we think already the need could almost be as much as double this. We think that maybe there's around 200 to 300 people living on the waterways, and various agencies have counted up to kind of 60 boats who might be kind of classed as continuous cruisers, so as in they don't have a home mooring and they move around, but are actually kind of staying more long term on temporary or unauthorized moorings. So that kind of suggests the need that actually there is a need for kind of more permanent residential spots. So there might be lots of people who are continuous cruisers who want to kind of move around, and actually that's part of their lifestyle. But some people actually might want to stay closer to the city because of work, or their children go to local schools. So that there is sort of a need that we're identifying for more permanent moorings. So I wonder if Rich could move on my slide. Yes, this is beautiful Jericho and the Agenda 21 moorings. And if you could move it on again. Yeah, so why? I would love to, I'd love to hear, if you're a boater, why do you live aboard? What are your reasons? Why do you live? Maybe you could put stuff in the chat, because I'd love to hear from you. I guess lots of people will say the kind of lifestyle and being close to nature, the community, being able to move around, but also it's about the housing crisis. I think a lot of people are moving on to boats because it's a more affordable housing option. And I think it's useful to compare to London, because there's a similar level of unaffordable housing. And so I think the number of boats in London has doubled in 9 years, and 50% of boaters who were living aboard in a recent Canal and River Trust said that it was because of affordability reasons that they were living there. So next one, please, Richard. This is a funny picture of boats crashing into each other. So this kind of squeeze, I think if you live in Oxford, you might have noticed over the last couple of years the increase in the number of boats on our waterways. And I think what is it that causes this? And I think it's really interesting to kind of see boating as a bit of a microcosm of all of the sort of social and political issues that are affecting the country. So I think there's a balancing act between the leisure boaters using the waterways in the summer and the increased demand on the kind of temporary moorings where otherwise live-on boaters will be actually staying. There's a massive lack of kind of centralised funding and this kind of increasing privatisation of some of the agencies that would have otherwise maintained the banks and the waterways, and that's making moorings inaccessible. And also because of climate change, more flooding has made mooring on the river in winter really dangerous. And I think the other thing we're seeing also is this kind of increasing market-driven approach to how moorings are kind of bought and sold. And so at the moment, the Canal and River Trust have an auction process of when a mooring comes up, they put it on an auction, and it's like an eBay bid. So essentially the price will go up and up and up and up, and the highest bidder wins the mooring. And so it's not transparent, it's not based on need, it's not based on local connection, it artificially inflates the prices, and so permanent moorings in the city are getting more and more expensive. And I think there's also, what we're seeing is like a kind of general tightening of restrictions and kind of criminalizing of traveling communities as well. So regulatory bodies are taking a kind of stricter enforcement approach, and this is meaning that many of the kind of former temporary moorings across the city have been removed or have become less flexible. The CRT are kind of enforcing that minimum travel range more strictly, so meaning that if you're on the canal, you're having to move every 2 weeks. And actually most of the temporary moorings close to the city actually only allow kind of 2 days of mooring. And the Environment Agency are also kind of tightening up their restrictions and trying to turn kind of previous kind of temporary moorings into kind of paid moorings. So I think that this is kind of is sort of showing the need, I guess, for not just more permanent residential moorings, but also longer term temporary moorings and more winter moorings in the city, and also services as well. So I don't know, Richard, if you could like flick back to that map. So if you're a boater in Oxford, you probably already know this if you're from outside of Oxford. If you live on the river, which is this blue line that's going through the city, if you want to get water or empty your toilet, you have to go all the way to Abingdon, which is down at the bottom of the page, or all the way over to Swinford, which is marked number 11 on the map up there. So you're travelling for like all day, basically, just to go and get some water, because there's no water points that are on the river. And if you're on the canal, you're kind of catered for a bit more, but again, you know, there's been a kind of a decreasing in access to services, and a kind of a story which just kind of shows just how in demand spaces are in Oxford. The Canal and River Trust operate a kind of winter moorings up in Jericho, which is kind of where the 9 is on that map. And this year they put it up for kind of auction. It's a first come first serve basis. There's about 80 meters of the towpath that they allocate. That's about 4 to 6 boats. And this year they sold out in less than 5 minutes. So this is like people waking up at 5 in the morning to go on and try and get their winter moorings. And so, you know, it's harder to get a winter mooring in Oxford than it is to get like a Glastonbury ticket. It's, you know, it's kind of crazy. So yeah, I think that's me over for now, and handing over to Richard.
Okay, thanks a lot, Alice. Yeah, so I'm going to go on to talk about the survey that we did. So one of the first things we did when we, commenced our work on this report was to put together a survey which we put out to Oxford boaters through WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups and things like this. And we got a good response. About 40 people got back to us, which we were pretty pleased with. And around half of those were continuous cruises, around half, had a permanent mooring. And some of the things that we learned from that were that 79% were interested in a permanent mooring. So obviously that probably included some of those already on moorings. So it may be that they were interested in alternative moorings. 85% wanted to hear more or be linked up with other boaters. in terms of, interested in community-led moorings. And just over 60% said that they were interested in principle to contribute time and skills as part of a group or a co-op to set up and manage your own mooring. So we felt that showed a significant interest in new permanent moorings, and and particularly in a community-led approach. So we also asked about other services. So the report is looking beyond just provision of moorings, but also at wider services. And as some of the examples that Alice gave, and very much my own experience, services are a really serious problem in Oxford. You spend a lot of time trying to find the basic needs. So yeah, 60% of continuous cruisers wanted more access to services, and it's the things that you would expect. So these maybe some of these might be surprising to people who don't have experience living on the waterways, but obviously access to water that Alice mentioned, recycling, general waste bins, LSAN. So this is maybe one of our bingo words. So this is a cassette toilet for anyone who's ever stayed on a caravan. If not a boat, you're probably familiar with this kind of a toilet. It's a bit of a standing joke with boats that you can't go 15 minutes with like inviting a new person onto a boat without starting to talk about toilets. And it's obviously the same with giving presentations about boats as well. So yeah, these kind of fundamental things around refuse, access to water, access to toilet facilities, but as well as significant kind of interest in shared garden growing space, community space, laundry facilities as well. So that was really, interesting to see the level of interest from boaters in those different services. And then I was just going to read out a quote actually, which I thought kind of encapsulated a lot of what we heard back in the survey. So this person said, I know how much moorings are sought after and how, due to the CRT bidding policy, the people who need them most always lose out. I would like to see a well-run community mooring kick in Oxford. So she's referring to a community interest company, which is one of the legal forms here. Much like the one in Birmingham, Urban Moorings Kick. The boating community has great strength, and there is more strength in a unified community. Canals have become living spaces, but that should be inclusive and not just for wealthy, retired, shiny boaters. The boating community needs local hubs and support to help people be able to live on the canal and not become marginalised or forgotten. A good visible example of a community mooring project is valuable not just locally, but nationally, as it can be replicated. And I think, in terms of that last point, that's why it's so great that there are so many people from other new nascent mooring co-ops here today as well, more kind of national sharing. I think is really valuable. So moving on, so why take a community-led approach to greater provision of moorings when we can leave it to the waterways authorities to provide them, to private marinas to provide them? So just to kind of cover off some of the reasons that we see value in the community-led approach. So firstly, boaters having greater control over the design and management of sites. And I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute with some nice examples of that. The site being able to be more affordable due to lower overheads if managed by a community group which is bringing volunteer labour, which might otherwise be done by paid contractors. Thirdly, allocations of moorings can be more transparent and based on need rather than the price someone is willing to pay. And then lastly, groups are more rooted in the local community and often want to improve the biodiversity, sustainability and usability of the mooring site for the wider community. And that's very much my experience of the various mooring co-ops which I've been in touch with. That last point really came through. I'm going to move on and just, as I said, kind of show you some pictures here. So this is of the longest established community-led mooring that we're aware of. So it's called RASCA. You can just about see its name there. That stands for Rotherham and Sheffield Canal Association. So this has been established since 1978. They have 12 boats and they're up on the Rotherham and South Yorkshire Navigation. They have some great facilities there. So we can see their clubhouse there, which has a shared kitchen and office and toilets. And then I'll just move on to the next slide, which gives us a bit of a bird's eye view. So you can see the boats along the waterway there. You can see the clubhouse. You can see they've got a little car park. They also have an orchard, so those trees along near the water there. They have growing space for vegetables as well. You can see a little bit of that to the right. And something that they've just installed, which they're very excited about, is a solar array. So they don't have mains electric for each of the boats. They do have water points, but not mains electric. So they've just installed this solar array, which they can then plug into to increase their power capacity. And then other bits and pieces they have, I think you can just about see it to the left, is communal gas storage. So most boaters will be familiar with the joy of lugging a heavy gas bottle onto your boat and try not to fall into the river with it. And so obviously it's still run that risk here, but you know, lovely to kind of just have gas delivered jointly for the whole community there. And they also have LSAN, so toilet emptying facility, as well as pump out facility for pump out toilets. So yeah, that's a bit of an overview of kind of their facilities. And here are some of the members of the association having a bonfire and watching a film. So one of the things they say on their website is they always, and I've also interviewed someone from there who wasn't able to join us today, otherwise it would be lovely to hear from her. Yeah, they always try and have fun with everything that they do as well. So they seem to have a really good community there and have established some fantastic facilities. And like I say, have been going since 1978. So how do they work? So they have monthly work parties. So that's where they'd be getting practical work done that needs to be done on the site. They would also have monthly meetings. They say these usually happen just after the work parties, where members of the committee that have played particular roles in the community, those committee members would give updates. Any decisions would be agreed and voted upon. Each of the tenants, each of the boaters on the site, there are certain rules which they need to stick to, and there's some consequences if those things don't happen. So, you know, if a boat was kind of becoming very untidy or dangerous, that's something which the community as a whole would raise, and so there's a sense of collective responsibility around those kind of things. In terms of cost, they charge about £2 per foot per month. They say that it is significantly less than mooring in a local marina, and they explain that that's the direct result of the members' volunteer labour that they're putting in. They started off with a 5-year lease from the Canal and River Trust, and now that's a 15-year lease. They've sort of seen the relationship kind of grow and strengthen with CRT, which has allowed that to happen. And in terms of legal form, they're unusual in that they are an unincorporated association. So they've not kind of registered as something like a company or a cooperative society. They're still a quite informal organisation, but they have a couple of individual trustees who kind of maintain the legal relationship on behalf of the community with the CRT. So that's just a bit about them as an organisation. So I found it really inspiring and interesting to kind of come across, yeah, all of the different boating cooperatives that we kind of researched and you know, that we interviewed. And yeah, this was one that really stood out for me. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of these different community-led moorings that we came across nationally. So, and I'm really pleased that we do have representatives from several of these and the next slide here. So, so the ones that we're aware of, and I'm sure we're missing some, and please feel free to stick in the chat if there's examples that we've not mentioned here. So Rasker, which I was just talking about up in Yorkshire, Calderdale in West Yorkshire. That's a slightly different setup. They spoke at the last event that the Co organised on this theme. Hermitage in London, been established for a number of years. Urban Moorings Kick, which was mentioned in Birmingham. The River Roading Trust is an interesting one that started out effectively as a squatted informal moorings in London, and then developed a good relationship with the local authority because of all the work they were doing to improve the waterway and access for local residents. And so now they have a formalized lease, and they're actually set up as a charity. Thermiston Moorings, I think we have somebody who's here, Pete from near Leicester. Narrowboat Farm, I think we've got Christine from there up in Scotland. That's been a particularly interesting example. It's a farm but with a mooring attached. Great to hear more from Christine about that. That's near Edinburgh. And then there's a number in development. So we're seeing a kind of expansion in interest and activity around this model. So Surge in London, Welcome in West London, which I've been lucky enough to get to know. Ham Wharf, Bow Creek, Poplar Harker is an interesting one. This is has been initiated by a housing association in East London, so it'd be adjacent to a residential, a new residential development. And then the Liverpool Boaters community, and I think again we have some members of that here as well. So that's a bit of an overview of those that we came to know, and something I'd emphasize is that we found a real range between these in terms of legal forms. So I mentioned one is a registered charity, we had cooperative societies, limited companies, and I mentioned one there initiated by a housing association even. So a common theme of not-for-profit and accountable to boaters, but different legal forms being used. Different legal arrangements with the waterways authorities, so between long leases, shorter leases, or simply a contract to manage the moorings, so more like a tenant management organization, a TMO kind of approach. Different processes for admitting new members. Some require a kind of proposer and a seconder from the existing group. Others have more of a kind of standard application form and interview process. You know, one we came across had a ballot for, you know, who would get into the initial cohort of boaters. Real range of facilities from, you know, what we could see there at Rasker down to sort of more basic provision. And then in terms of financing, some of them were completely self-financed, so that Hermitage Moorings in London's an example of that, whilst others have looked to gain grants and have been successful gaining grants towards establishing their moorings, as well as loans. And then lastly, on enterprises, this is something that was really interesting to see, was the different ways that community-led moorings were initiating other income streams in order to, you know, to bring income into their community and reduce their living costs that way. So Hermitage that I mentioned have a number of visitor berths. They also organise various events. The River Roading Trust have an eco boat that they hire out for events as well. I read, I think that perhaps it was the Liverpool group even, I hope I'm not going to get all this wrong, has plans for a coffee kiosk. There was, someone did. So a whole bunch of different ways that that moorings were, you know, finding ways to bring in income. And the visitor mooring one as well is a good example of where permanent moorers are finding a way to kind of support those who are living a continuous cruising itinerant lifestyle as well by having those there. And of course, you know, if you have that, then you can also consider, are there facilities that those boaters passing through can access, for instance, you know, buying gas, or, you know, if doing work on their boats whilst they're in the moorings, that sort of thing. So yeah, that was interesting too. Right, back to Alice.
Yeah, so I guess I will talk a little bit now about Oxford and where we've been kind of looking for potential sites. And first, it's probably kind of important to say, when we were looking for sites, we wanted to do so with a number of kind of principles and approaches that would kind of align with the values that we're trying to work within. And so I guess our first principle is that we didn't want to privatise existing accessible temporary mooring spaces. So we don't want to kind of convert existing free moorings into paid residential moorings. So this would reduce the number of temporary moorings in the city and then further limit the boaters who choose to continuously cruise. And we got that suggestion from the National Association of Bargee Travellers, who I think are on the call as well. And I think the other key thing is actually that we are suggesting we take, that agencies take a cooperative approach rather than an enforcement approach. So there is actually currently a precedent of lawful use for moorings that have been used residentially for a certain amount of time, so about 10 years. And so where there are existing unregulated moorings which are being used residentially, then agencies could kind of seek a collaborative approach. So that's one of the main kind of recommendations in the report, that actually agencies work with existing boaters that are using sites on a long-term basis, whether or not it's with explicit permission or not. And so where those boaters are kind of willing or up for taking a more kind of formal community-led approach, this could be done especially where boaters are maybe facing eviction or facing fines or sanctions for kind of occupying those spaces on a residential basis if there isn't the kind of permission. And I think what's kind of key to say is that in many cases these groups are actually already operating as a community, and they've probably invested their own time and finances in kind of maintaining the moorings and promoting the biodiversity of the site. So yeah, and I guess one of the other kind of approaches is also to maybe work with other groups of boaters who are on existing moorings, for example, the Agenda 21 moorings, who might want to kind of form a management cooperative to kind of manage their own facilities. So that's like in the case of the Calderdale Boat Club, they have a management co-op who rents directly from the CRT. So rather than each of the individuals having an agreement with the CRT, they have one agreement, which means they can kind of collectively bargain and advocate for better facilities. So yeah, so I'll skip over this because we're taking a long time and we want to leave some chance for some discussion. But if you can skip on to the next slide, Richard. This is some of the sites that we've kind of identified in the report. So there's around 12 potential sites, but all of them are obviously in much more need of more feasibility work to see if they are actually viable. And the majority, you can see from the red dots, the majority are actually owned by the City Council or other kind of public bodies, and they're mostly on the river. And I think the ones that have the greatest potential are where a collaborative approach could be taken with existing boaters groups. So on the Castle Mill stream and on the Redbridge Paddock, where there are people who are already living there and who are otherwise at risk of eviction, who could, with support from agencies, work to resolve the planning issues, and they could then be turned into affordable, well-managed community-owned moorings by and for the people who already live there. So Castle Mill Stream is a particular example. It's number 2 on the map. It's in Jericho. There might be some people from Castle Mill Stream on the call, and you might have read in the papers that they have been on that site for around 21 years. And there's some planning issues there, and they're currently at risk of eviction, but they have actually formed a group and they've registered as a company, and they're keen to try and buy out that site and turn it into a community mooring alongside the kind of wider development of that Jericho Wharf area. So maybe the next one. Yeah, so I think we're in a really interesting time, because I think there's a bit of an open door here. There's a lot of opportunities for this. The Oxford Plan said that there should be a commitment to protect existing moorings and to explore new opportunities to increase moorings and services. And it mentions the Redbridge site as a potential space for continuing to have moorings. And in January 2021, the Cabinet responded to some recommendations that they wanted to explore the idea of community-owned moorings and increasing provision of services. They recognised that boaters were kind of underserved currently. And I think what could be really, really interesting, I think the City Council has an opportunity to really lead the way here. They've got a new version of the housing and homelessness strategy coming up, and boats could be recognised as homes in that strategy. And I think with the difficulty of finding land for housing in Oxford, there are many sites that we've identified in this report that wouldn't be suitable for developing kind of bricks and mortar housing. But if with sensitive design, making sure that the sites adapt to changing water levels, moorings could be kind of making use of land that is in a flood zone but wouldn't otherwise be used for housing. And I think with really interesting new designs around kind of solar, composting, that there could be a real potential for lovely low impact eco moorings. And I think we could see moorings as actually a kind of a solution to some of the housing problems in Oxford. That's me.
Great, thanks, Alice. Yeah, so I'll just say a little bit about different models around tenure and governance. There's quite a lot of detail on this in the report, and very happy to answer questions on it, but I'll try not to go into too much here. But really, we could see different ways in which this could happen. We consider this on sites in Oxford, but I think it could also apply elsewhere. So you could have a situation, the most straightforward in a way, where the land is simply transferred to a community-led group, to the Boating Co-operative. That group funds, and constructs the mooring site and manages it on behalf of its tenants, its members. And it might, source those funds through a mixture of grants and loans, as well as contributions that members may be able to make themselves. Secondly, that the land is leased by the landowner to the group. So, a lease of different lengths, and the landowner may still play a role. So whether this, could be, in our case, the City Council, or it could be a different landowner elsewhere, that landowner could play a role in partnership with the community group, covering the costs and then transferring the site to the group upon completion. Or it could be that the landowner retains ownership of the site and sets up a management agreement with the group, who then manage it on the landowner's behalf. And so, and then the last one was an interesting suggestion that actually a third party, a community land trust, could hold the site. That would mean that it's retained in perpetuity in community ownership, so it's secure, and the community land trust would set up a lease with the Boating Co-operative, which is managing and living on the site. And we explored that discussion a little bit with Oxford CLT, which is also brilliantly here tonight. So a few different models around that, which different ones would work in different situations. So we're going to wrap up now. You might be pleased to hear. So just to, and then we'll hand over to Christabel, but just to kind of cover our key recommendations from the report. And we've mentioned a few of these as we've spoken tonight. So one was to that there should be a cross-agency approach to consider how facilities for boaters could be improved. So including the City Council, Canal and River Trust, the Environment Agency. We've seen how desperate the need for improved services, that there is. Secondly, that a boaters group could be established as a body that can engage in advocacy representing boaters in the city, boaters' needs, in terms of perhaps, you know, those services, in terms of more and better moorings. And that's something we'd be really keen to come out of tonight's meeting. And we'll talk about how people can kind of stay in touch about that as well. And I think a point we'd make on that, and from my personal experience in Oxford, is, you know, that simply there is strength in being more unified, and yeah, a real opportunity for boaters to come together and advocate for various things here. So thirdly, consider the role of moorings as part of the new housing and homelessness strategy. So Alice just mentioned that. 4, undertake further feasibility work on the proposed mooring site at Redbridge Paddocks, which is included in the local plan. And, you know, certainly that feasibility work should, you know, also involve discussions with boaters currently moored there as well. 5, consider how existing unregulated moorings could be made into permanent regulated moorings. So Alice was talking about that and gave the example of Castle Millstream. And then finally, consider other sites identified in the report for inclusion in the next iteration of the local plan. And yeah, so that, over to you, Alice, for our next steps.
Yeah, so I'm just going to post in the chat. There we go. So if you're interested in being part of a kind of local boaters association, which I think Christopher will kind of talk a little bit more about, so Collaborative Housing have kind of offered to help facilitate and set that up. So it might be a forum for local boaters to kind of come together and advocate for the issues affecting them, but also those who might be interested in being part of a community-owned mooring to kind of come together and start organising. Or if you are an existing community-owned or cooperative mooring or boaters co-op, and you want to kind of get together with others who are starting out or who are already established, we want to try and see if we can facilitate a bit of a network, a national network of community-owned moorings. So there's a feedback form which I've just put in the chat box, and so if you want to kind of sign up, share your details, and we can kind of get back in touch. Okay, yeah, and so I think we'll hand over to Christopher now.
Okay, hi everyone. I've been having internet issues today, so if I disappear, then I'll turn my video off. I'm just going to share my screen. So hi everyone, I am a boater living in Oxford. I have been based in Oxford now for I've been on a boat for about 7 years, and just under that I've been living in Oxford. Yeah, my journey as a boater started probably very differently from any other boater here, because I feel like the conversation that I have with boaters, it always depends on kind of situations that people find themselves in. It's sometimes to do with housing, but it's sometimes to do with finding dreams or feeling freedom. And for me, I became a boater because I was living fairly nomadically at the time, and so part of the way of life for me was important, but equally being self-sufficient. I live alone now, and I feel like living on a boat and living alone is a solution that can be affordable. It also means that I can have a bit of a buffer if I need to move between jobs or take something which provides less of an income. And so, yeah, I think that is something that means that boats being affordable is an important thing for me. So yeah, I'm currently based on the river, have moved around between the canal in Oxford and the river, and I find that it's a very seasonal thing. So the winter, as I think Alice was saying, it's becomes very flooded. If you don't know the Thames and you haven't lived on it before, the winter is a time to stay still. So everything becomes redboarded, another bit of boater terminology. And it's not possible to move. So I usually spend a bit of time somewhere on the Thames. This winter I'm actually on Redbridge Paddock, everywhere I go I find different communities, and here there's a wonderful one, and that is something that I love about being a boater as well. So yeah, I've never had a mooring. I'm a liveaboard continuous cruiser, which means that my license doesn't give me the permission to stay in any one particular place, and I would say that I've never, at the beginning of the time as a boater, I didn't feel the need for a mooring, and as time has gone on it feels a bit more like a consideration. And when I think about this, I think it's partly to do with the pressures of scarcity, so like the pressures of there not being that many places to move to as a continuous cruiser, in Oxford this is something which has become more of an issue. So I reckon 6 years ago you could kind of move around in the centre of Oxford and be sure to find a place, and so 6 years on this looks really different, and there's even this year been the case of people kind of double mooring, so that looks a bit more like London does, where you've got kind of one boat moored next to another. In Oxford actually this isn't allowed, so because of the rowers in the city centre, the EA don't want that, so even if people are willing to do that, it's actually enforced against. Some other things other dynamics that I've noticed or been a part of in the boating communities in Oxford are that there is this feeling that sometimes there's strategies for regulating boaters or boating activities which don't feel like they're kind of working with boaters. It feels like there is this kind of anti-boater agenda, and some examples of that have been like a public space protection order which was initiated and tried to be enforced on the main stretch of the Thames, and also an increase in paid enforcement, like 48 hours enforcement, like kind of ticket inspectors you get for car parks but along the river, and that's kind of been noticeably encroaching on space. So it feels a bit like maybe not anti-boater but anti-liveaboard, long-term liveaboard, and maybe favouring other kinds of boaters, like leisure boaters or part-time summer boaters. Real lack of facilities. You have to go 7 miles from the city centre to get to a nearest water tap, which it kind of feels a bit like, it does feel a bit like it becomes more normal than it should, being on a boat, that you have to travel a really long way to get water. And if you think about it, it's like water is something that we all need every day, and it is kind of shocking that we do have to do that. And there are ways that people have access to certain facilities but that are a bit closer, but that's usually on a kind of nepotistic relationship type basis, like someone, therefore you can get a key to an LSAN, but the provisions aren't from the agencies who we pay our license fee to. It's a bit of a kind of ironic situation in that, like, I think people do want to live on boats to be more environmentally friendly, but then getting rid of waste or doing recycling is just really not easy, or very inconvenient. And then just the fact that flooding is becoming more normal, I think that's something that we've all noticed as boaters, and so when winter comes, the mooring spots are fewer and far between, even more than in previous years, because more places are flooding. Just reading the report, there was lots of positive stuff in there, and I work for shared assets as well, so I believe in kind of taking land into collective and community ownership and sharing resources, and kind of building governance structures that work for everyone who's involved in a collective. But then, yeah, when I was kind of thinking about it, a few considerations or questions came to mind, so I just thought I'd put them out there, really. So I think particularly with boaters, there are often really different needs and interests in boaters groups. So it could be to do with already having a mooring or not, kind of, yeah, going into boating for different reasons, having really varied incomes, but all kind of, it's such a diverse community and people are all brought together, and that's the beauty of it. But then when it's also the challenge, I think, of unifying such a diverse group, there is kind of like a sense of a marginalized community, and that's not always a negative thing. But then kind of involvement or consultation in a project like this, there's still issues relating to kind of trust in organizations because of past experiences of regulation being quite negative and not consultative. I think when I was thinking about co-design, I think co-design is crucial. So like bringing different interest groups into a design process in a really participatory way. But yeah, just kind of like the idea of centering boaters' interests and considering them distinct from people who are in housing, not as a kind of, yeah, I guess I just thought, it's not a side project of the housing development, you know, it's not kind of like an add-on. And I think that's an important thing to make clear through a participatory process. And also just like boats aren't for everyone. I think that this is something that came to me because there's almost like a simple equation of like, well, boats are part of like the solution to the housing crisis. And I think that's not actually, like, it's a very practical and challenging life. I think even if you do have access to more conveniences and facilities, I think, yeah, there is just there's like a kind of separate issue of like boaters' needs for people who are living on boats at the moment, and not necessarily thinking of like boats being a kind of future provision. Yeah, and obviously there's stuff around kind of the market prices of housing which are putting pressure on things like waterways, but yeah, it's definitely just a too small area of land and like opportunities for mooring for that to be really considered like part of the solution. Yeah, another thing is that boating itself is work, and I think building in kind of community leadership within the boater community would be addition to kind of like the work that it takes to manage and like upkeep a boat. Yeah, so just a couple of reflections on like the plans and how boaters could fit into that. I think there's two parallel things going on. There's kind of like an opportunity to set up community-led moorings, which could be really hopeful, but this is not a substitute for the fact that there is just like a really there's under-resourced waterways. And so what the report does highlight as a kind of separate issue is that this is an additional need for all boaters. We need like a higher baseline of provision of facilities and services. So that's water, waste disposal sites and boatyards. So yeah, I think those two things can be considered separately. Like, where am I, sorry. Yeah, and in setting up a cooperative, it would be really good to consider different needs from the very first stages of setting up this community-led group or this advocacy group, and put energy and resources, if possible, into like building trust and collectivizing interests, which I think will be quite hard work. Affordability, yeah, I think for boaters, this is on top of license fees and fuel costs, plus repairs and maintenance costs. So like the budget isn't the same as living on grid. And And yeah, and the question of will current boaters be prioritised? You've kind of answered this actually in your presentation, but yeah, because there is continued pressure on space for continuous cruisers, and yeah, if you know, as an incentive for people to take up boating, or if boaters do need to move off land to make way for these moorings, I guess there's just a question of prioritisation. How much time have I got? Couple more minutes.
Okay. Yes, you're fine, Crystal.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then just on the affordability issue, just like, I guess, issues around kind of sliding scales, or involving boaters in the decision making on how affordability will be decided. This could be part of like the advocacy group or the boaters group decision making, and then maintaining affordability into the future seems like a really important thing that the co-op could provide for. Also, the advocacy group maybe could speak to wider boater interests as well, not just the community-led mooring site. And yeah, it just seems really positive that there is a kind of loose, informal, but like, yeah, growing network of other community-led mooring initiatives, so that that advice could be shared, and particularly around type of ownership that suits the community in the short and long term, that could be learned from other similar initiatives. And then, yeah, partly just because I'm, but yeah, I've been based on the Redbridge paddock site for a while now, and there are a few just kind of local considerations that are tied to that place. So it's, yeah, in the report it does talk about kind of facilities for all boaters being in this kind of backwater, and yeah, there are more boats further up as well. It isn't necessarily a good place for that. It's a dead end. And there is a lot of current in the winter and in the spring and autumn, so it doesn't calm down very quickly. So you've got quite a difficult navigation and turning, which I can say from experience, it's not always easy. So yeah, just one observation there. And I think just generally better to have facilities on the main navigation. There are also people living here who do act as caretakers for the land, so it would be really great to see that this continues, you know, people who are looking after riverbeds with planting willow trees, being part of nature restoration. And yeah, there is the issue of this site having a kind of like a contaminated underneath the topsoil, and so if there was a housing development here, just considering how that would affect all residents, including boaters. Yeah, and yeah, that's it for me really, and I'll be up for answering questions if anything wasn't clear.
Thank you, Christabel. Thank you, everyone, and thank you very much to Alice and Richard for, you know, really clear and presentations that really brought the issues home. All of you, thank you. So yeah, I'd just like to reiterate, Alice put something in the chat about we've put a Google Doc form in which for some feedback from you, and also just to get an idea about if you want to be involved going forward, so that we can contact you again. So during the next section, if you want to fill out that form, please do so. That would be really helpful, or we'll send it out after this as well, so you can do it after. But we're going to just open up now to questions. I should, Alice alluded to OCLT being on the call, and we've got Deborah Glass-Wooden with us. So we've got a bit of a panel of experts, but I know there are also a lot of people in the audiences, but practically everyone in the audience is an expert. So I think we can all answer the questions really together. I'd like to, I think the whole thing through the chat as I've been watching, it's made me realise just what a wealth of experience and knowledge there is in this room. People have been bringing, you know, just the things Christabel alluded to in her talk about some of the sites, and, you know, that deep knowledge of the waterways and what's good, what's available, you know, it just shows that it needs to come up to me from the boats community if it's going to succeed, because you're the ones that know. But there's been really specific questions being pulled out, I think, around particularly that one of the main ones has been around affordability, and that being an absolute key issue for everyone, and some real worries that, you know, is affordability going to be maintained, particularly if moorings become regulated, where they're not, how are people going to carry on affording them? And I just wonder if anyone could talk to that specific issue around, you know, well, what are the costs? Maybe outlining a bit more, what are the costs and what do people think is an affordable rate? You know, what does that look like, really, affordability? Who would like to, is there anybody who'd like to take that, Alice?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to kind of bring in some experience of living in a housing co-op, and there were some interesting suggestions in the chat around how a group might decide its own kind of rent level. And so being in a housing co-op, we're both the kind of the landlord and the tenant, and so we kind of collectively manage our finances. And so what that means is we can adjust our rents based on you know, people's incomes, what they can afford to pay, but also on what our kind of costs and overheads are. And so if someone is in financial difficulty, they can get rent holidays. There's, you know, it's a lot more sensitive than having a private landlord. So, you know, this is kind of why we're suggesting that, you know, if moorings were being managed and you know, run by the people that were living in them, then, you know, they can more easily manage their own costs and overheads. And so we've sort of started to do some work in the report about kind of mapping out what the costs might be and how a business model might work. And I know that there are some groups here on the call, like Surge, who are already kind of doing their business plans and things for their own kind of moorings. But I think it also really depends on the kind of mooring. And so there's been a lot of chat here about how could we be combining these moorings with, you know, sensitive ecological designs, you know, for our waterways. And so I think, you know, we could be looking at like really low impact, light touch moorings that work with the natural environment, but, you know, maybe low cost for people that are living there as well.
Thank you. I do wonder, I don't know, Richard, apologies if I missed it, but did you have any information about sort of the rates of somewhere like Raxpa, and, you know, how those costs work in those sort of organisations?
The rates at Raska, did you say?
Yes, yeah, or anywhere actually.
Yes. So they were charging £2 per foot per month. Okay. I think so. For a 50-foot boat, that would be about £100 per month is what they were charging. We did ask in the survey as well around what people would consider an affordable rate for rent, and I haven't got that bit to hand, but I think the majority were sort of saying that they would be prepared to pay up to 400. Am I getting that right, Alice? Yeah. You know, but of course also recognize everything that people are saying in the chat, which is that, you know, different situations on a boat are affordable for different people, aren't they? And one thing which I wanted to add in as well, a suggestion we made in the report, is that it would be possible for a boat co-op to also have a boat available to rent for somebody who didn't already own their boat to move onto the site with, which I thought was an interesting one, because of course not everyone has capital to buy or is able to get a loan to buy a boat. So that's a way to bring in a bit of renting, a way for people to try out boat life, you know, as part of a boater co-op. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, and another thing from the chat, Julian actually was talking quite a lot about infrastructure. Julian, I don't know whether you want to talk to that a little bit more, both in terms of facilities, but also I think the actual infrastructure for the mooring itself.
Yeah, what it is, obviously, as you can see, I'm involved with Oxford Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. And we, at our recent Council of Governors meeting, we were talking about the local infrastructure of GPs and dentists and the, you know, healthcare facilities that would be available for the new housing estates that are going up around Aylesbury.
Right.
And the impact that these new housing estates are having on the established infrastructures,
Yeah.
because the actual patient catchment areas for the GP surgeries could do one of two things: either increase their catchment areas to encompass these new housing estates, or what has been proposed, to build new GP surgeries. Now, I appreciate this is about boaters and about using the waterways, and having done historical reenactment, I can sort of key into that. You know, looking at when we used to live in mud houses in little hamlets, you know, the boats could be seen as the same way. You know, they are collectives. But in the modern world, people would expect access to, say, a hospital or a community or local hospital trust, an A&E department, a GP surgery, a dentist, you know, any other specialist care needs that they would need. And as per the fixed moorings, I feel that kind of infrastructure would also need to be considered, not necessarily charged to by the boaters, but actually giving the boaters that facility. So, you know, if they choose to live on a boat, they should not be disenfranchised from receiving the same services as a land dweller such as myself.
Alice, were you going to come in? And Al, I've seen your hand as well, so I'll come to you in a minute.
I just wondered, I think someone has just posted something really useful about this, and maybe they want to kind of speak to it. But I think, you know, where we got some of our information from was this kind of needs assessment that local authorities are kind of obliged to do. And part of that is also looking at, you know, once we know the numbers of people living on the waterways, then there's obviously needs to be kind of planning put in place to make sure that there is, you know, adequate access to services, you know, for those who are living in the area. And I think one of the big problems that we've kind of highlighted in the report is actually we don't really know how many people are living on the waterways in Oxford and in Oxfordshire. And so being able to make sure there are adequate services is really difficult. So I think one of the recommendations is that, you know, there is a kind of a boat count, or actually a lot of the kind of agencies and people who are on this call can kind of work together to work out, you know, who is out there and what needs aren't being met currently. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thank you.
Just to beg in, who's talking at the minute? Alice. Would information like that not be available from the recent census? And if not, why not? And if not, should we not raise that as an issue with the county council?
I wonder if someone from the NBTA might come in on this, because I think this is kind of their area of expertise potentially. Just to invite them, I don't know, maybe they don't want to.
Is there someone from the NPTA? No. I've seen stuff in the chat.
They've said they don't have any audio. So
oh, what a shame! What a shame! Ah, dear. Al, would you like to come in, because you've been waiting patiently with your hand raised?
Yes, hiya. It was just going to go back to the affordability point, because we, as a kind of a newish co-op working together, we're trying to work out ways how to make it affordable for moorings. I think Richard's seen our documents and working process on this, and one of the key points that we made a thing of in our moorings agreement is basically to make sure a boat is valued before it goes on the moorings, and then if someone sells their boat, they don't have a right to transfer the mooring with the sale of their boat, and they can also, only if they do sell the boat and the co-op agrees to the new members joining the co-op, then the boat is only allowed to be sold at the rate plus RPI or CPI, and then any maintenance or upgrades. So that basically means people can't treat their boats as a property asset to leverage value from the mooring, and that keeps the mooring constantly affordable, only going up with inflation, and that's a big problem with housing. So we thought that was a good way of getting around that. I think I had another thought that's gone from me. I don't know if anyone else wants to carry on, but I'll hand it over otherwise.
Is there anybody else? I'm trying to keep up with the messages, which is proving quite challenging. Got lots of positivity. There's a lot in the chat around the Redbridge site in particular. And I suppose you should say, you know, it's a site identified in a local plan. The hub or researchers have, you know, they're not trying to push that as a particular site. It's just an opportunity that's been identified. And I think really what's recognised is that, you know, if we were to do this as a community-led mooring, it needs to be led by boaters. So it's, you know, boaters that need to decide how that might happen and what might happen there, because as I said at the beginning, I think it's you that's got the knowledge rather than us. So there's been, you know, there's no plan really, other than we know there's an identified opportunity there, and, you know, a plan to talk to people about that and whether that could work as a community-led mooring site. So I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything else, particularly about Redbridge. Okay, just trying. Has anybody picked out anything else from the site? Because there's such a lot from the chat. A bit about, oh, there's some answers about the census, to say the right questions weren't asked in the census, and some people didn't get a census form, so that's helpful.
Yeah, Fiona, I think Christabel in the chat, she's just made quite a valid issue. And she said also another issue in Oxford is it's hard to find a mooring site without a boat, and sometimes you have to bid for both.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And yeah, I can't remember, Alice, it was Alice or Richard who mentioned this idea about having boats to rent, which I think could be a really good solution. For some people, it would be a lot more affordable. Alice?
Yeah, because I think the, you know, if you can't afford to buy a boat outright, you know, if you don't have you don't have a deposit to be able to get a kind of a loan, they're kind of marine financing loans, then, you know, potentially a mooring cooperative or community-owned mooring could reserve a boat that is a kind of rented boat, so you don't actually have to have capital, or you don't need to own a boat to be able to kind of have that opportunity to live on a mooring. I wonder if no one else has got any questions. I've got a question for the boaters on the call. If you were to be part of a kind of local network of boaters, what would you like it to do? What would you like to see discussed? Maybe people could put that in the chat, or maybe they could raise a hand and ask. Yeah, let us know.
I'd also be interested in, because I can see from the chat a lot of other people are interested in this sort of national networking, this sharing, and really who might host that, how might we make that happen? I mean, if anybody's got any ideas around, you know, are there existing structures for that? Or, you know, is there an obvious organisation that might facilitate that kind of network? So if anybody's got any ideas around that, I'd be pleased to hear them. Mark's got his hand up.
Yeah, hi, Mark Walton from Shared Assets, also a boat on the Kennet and Avon currently. But yes, Shared Assets supports community organisations that are involved in kind of enterprising management of land and ownership of land, and would be interested in discussing with people who are interested in setting up a network around how that might work. We can't, I'm not quite sure how we'd resource that currently, but certainly interested in doing that and have experience of supporting community land-based enterprises and groups.
Oh, that's brilliant, thank you. I think again, I'd just refer back to that form. I don't know, Alice, could you repost it just so it's kind of somewhere more accessible? If people could feed that sort of stuff back, then obviously after the event, we'll try and get people together who might be interested in doing it. We'll throw some ideas around. Christine, okay.
Hi there, I'm from Community Moorings Scotland, up in Scotland. We've got a completely different issue than what you experienced down in Oxford and in London areas, where you've got too many, well, you know, you've got a lot of boaters and things like that. We're kind of set up for the opposite. The canal opened in 2001 and there was expected to be maybe 600 boats on the lowland canals, and yet we're not even at half that. So between the fact that Scottish canals have basically a monopoly, and in 2016 there was a bit of a backlash with boaters and how they were being treated. That's why Community Moorings Scotland was kind of set up to address both the fact that they had the monopoly, communities wanted to take, or boaters wanted to take action and to see about establishing community moorings, and to increase the right for boaters to have an option to live up in the lowland canals especially, and that's what we're trying to do, to increase the vibrancy. But we've been a part of, like, I think with Al, Alistair, the trustee, he was on with Al from Surge Co-op, and I think Paul from the I can't remember his group as well. And I think at the end of that, I don't know if the conclusion was, but the IWA were actually looking to try and collaborate all this information, because obviously we've came about it from different aspects. With Surge being a co-op, we're actually a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation. And so there's different ways of going about it. But actually, I know that one of my fellow trustees, Jonathan Moss, he's kind of setting up a toolkit for how to establish, and I think Richard is in contact with Jonathan, but again, I'm sure that IWA had a wee bit of influence, where they were wanting to pull together as many resources from the different groups that are trying to establish community moorings. So maybe that would be helpful for you to tap into that information.
Thank you. Yeah, brilliant. Paul, was that you? Paul Kelly, was that you that was involved in that? Have you come across anything in your work in Liverpool? I don't know if it's you that was there.
No, I don't know if Grace or Esam want to say. I think it's interesting for us here, again, our context with, it's about how boating becomes part of the story of housing opportunity for people. It's just part of the narrative along with everything else. And I think, just so people know, I'm running the community-led housing hub in Liverpool, so we're trying to get an initiative off the ground here with Grace and Essan, because we have a lot of water, a lot of empty water just sat there that we could use much more of. So yeah, I mean, I just have to say, this is really important piece of work that you've pulled off here, and it's great to see it moving, and we've certainly been really throwing it around our politicians here to say that this has happened. And I think that's what I do think the climate right now is, there's a real opportunity. I think people's minds are open right now to exploring different options. So yeah,
Yeah, there seems to be stuff happening around the country, that's for sure. Noala, you've got your hand up as well.
Okay, yes. I'm sorry, I missed the bit where you said, apparently said, if anyone could say something about Redbridge. And I think it's this is a brilliant initiative, and I really would support it. But I think I'm the person who is the present tenant on Redbridge. I mean, and the one thing I want to say, there isn't water there. It's a very basic lumpy site. But it is got full of nature, especially along the banks. And this is why I think it has to be a very sensitive type of mooring. I mean, at the moment we've got something like 6 boats on it, moored the whole length. But the idea in the report that said the first 200 meters, that's as far as Leo's boats, could have, how many boats were they saying? 20.
Yeah,
20. And actually, at the moment, they have 1, 2, 3, 4 boats lengths there, because we have left the wilder bits of the reeds and everything where the water voles are. Now, people might think that's being very precious, but actually water voles are extremely rare, and we do have breeding kingfishers, and kingfishers need the overhanging branches. So I don't think we should allow what the council had initially planned, which was cut down all the trees, put a concrete path along there, and put a concrete, base for the river, where you have all these nests of the water voles. So we have videos of them. We're not just sort of talking out of the top of our hats. And they are breeding, and they are fascinating to watch. And I'd love more people to see them, really. But and the other thing I want is that you're not led up the garden path to think Redbridge would be the solution and a quick solution, because it is a massive problem, that great unregulated landfill site. And Alex Hollingsworth didn't mention in the report a very serious toxin, which is one of the many serious ones, which is hydrogen cyanide. And there's somebody who had houses on an old landfill, and the boy was killed because the hydrogen cyanide was pushed along by floodwater. His father was paralyzed. I mean, it's serious stuff. So they have to be very careful how they get rid of it. And they're talking about piling, and that could actually go into the river and kill all the
So
problems there. So it has to be a very sensitive
yeah, I think we're hearing that loud and clear. And
that's enough for me to say.
I think probably it's the sort of it's an area we need to take forward. I mean, we are running short of time, yes. But it's an area that needs to be really taken forward as part of any further voters' work. I would say that that's where we need to talk about these issues, I think. Sorry.
One area that wasn't described fully about the feasibility study that was carried out, the ground investigation, where they dug trial pits and boreholes at Redbridge, is that there's actually the original buried channel of the Thames. It shows in their suite of old Ordnance Survey maps in the annex of their survey report. The old channel of the Thames used to go diagonally across the field, and when the ring road was built, the channel that we have now was excavated, and the old channel was filled in. So there's going to be a more porous channel underneath this landfill that could be a way that toxins are carried out. If load is put on top of it, toxins will be squeezed out into the water courses and cause a serious pollution problem, really.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, as I say, Noala and Leo, I mean, please, come along if we have meetings, and
I mean, I'd be happy for people to come to the site and have a real look at it. If you wanted to arrange that, we could do that. But okay, so we better let you get on.
Thank you, it's appreciated. Right. Finally, I'll come to you, Deborah, and then I think we probably do need to wrap up. But you go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, in the spirit of levelling up, Paul, would you like us to come up and fill up your waterways up north?
That's a brilliant idea.
Well, I don't know how much we say this to Southerners. We have space, we have houses, we have land, we have it all. So do come.
Yeah, no, I think that should be volunteering to be levelling down. We've got far too much wealth disparity here, unfortunately.
in the interest of sharing. So, well, I think we probably do need to wrap up. It's just gone 8:30. I would like to thank Richard and Alice for a really brilliant report, and for their excellent presentation tonight, and also for Christabel. And I'm sorry, Christabel, you didn't get to share your presentation, but thank you for what you said, and that really hit home. And thank you to everybody who shared, and I'm sorry if I haven't picked everything up in the chat, there was a lot going on, but we will look at it. And you know, as I say, what it just shows is that how much knowledge and experience is there that, you know, I don't have, and none of us could have individually, and that's the power of collectivism, I guess. So please fill out the feedback form, because we would love to keep in touch with you. We really want this to carry on. We really want to try and do something with the momentum that's been created. And really, we can't do that unless we get your say-so to involve you in future. So please do fill that out. That's really important. And just good night, really. Have a good rest of your evenings. And thank you for your time and the energy that you put in for tonight. Thank you.